in order to introduce other topics that we have gone through during this month. And we are in this scene in the Caribbean in relation to the topic that has to do with the cocaine market, its development and transformation across times. And from there, a series of tensions, political tensions, that we have internally in the United States, in Latin America as well. And November 7th and 8th, we are going to meet at COP30 in Belém do Pará in Brazil. We have the question whether the U.S. will assist, and we are going to talk about the climate crisis, a key cause of my political activity during the past decade at least, and it's a priority of our external policies in Colombia. Maybe we've gone outside of that priority, but when I came here to power, we established this, and this is in the first of our policies that we are going to set this as our priority. This developed good relations with the United States. In several points, we agree on the handling of this crisis and the potential of clean energy that South America has, and how this can transform 100% the actual capacity, energy capacity of the United States, turning it into clean energy. So one part, I would say 30-40% of the solution of not allowing that climatic crisis to continue lies on such an agreement. And we stated this to Biden. At this moment, we had a series of conversations directly with President Biden. We had a good relationship in terms of this point in particular. One of the main axes of the foreign policy of Colombia is not the same one as the foreign policy of the United States at this moment, as you know, and maybe that is, in reality, the fact that is separating the international policies of both countries. So we have COP30 in a couple of days, and November 9th, we will have in the city of Santa Marta, a very beautiful city, maybe the first to be built in Latin America by Europeans. Santa Marta in the Caribbean, in a paradise city. And there will Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean will meet as a meeting that is completely immersed in this context, geopolitical context. Europe and Latin America is seeking for a deeper reapproachment for our historical ties in terms of culture, cultural ties. This is the moment in which we are living in the Caribbean Sea. We have warships, we have aircrafts, missiles that you have seen and reported about these. A fisherman from Santa Marta was murdered in his boat. So here our discussion begins, because these type of maneuvers that we think are against international law, the United States, in this type of actions, is committing extrajudicial executions. Whether the people at the boats are guilty of cocaine trafficking or not, in both circumstances we have an excessive use of force that is punished by the humanitarian international law. We have done things in a different way and not aside and separated from the U.S. What we have been able to achieve is that we have been the government very successful in the seizing of cocaine in the history of the world. At this moment, this is being tarnished and should not be tarnished. Seizing cocaine, I'm not talking about the plants, but the chemical transformation, the product that is being persecuted around the world. Because of the United States, the government that has seized the most amount of cocaine in the world since that cocaine exists and since it's illegal, it's this government that I represent. With a public force that has become the most efficient in the world with its three arms, and a government that has ordered and built a strategy. So the forces are not independent and the president on the other hand. No, I built and ordered the strategy. What is the strategy entail? Quickly put, this was put in place in the first year of my mandate, and I discussed this with the population. The strategy is of claiming that the forceful eradication were the will of the rural workers where that plant has been cultivated have failed. I could go even further back in that failure, but I wanted to concentrate in this case. That strategy has been a failure in Colombia. I could show this with a couple of charts. But contrary to this, if our strategy is to focus ourselves in the drug trafficker and not the rural worker that is planting the seed, then we will be much more efficient. There is a separation, and this is political. During this past years, since the year 1993, when Colombia had the coke plant, before Colombia didn't have the plant, but we did have the mafia. The production of the plant in Colombia started in 1993. Since that phase on, the war on drugs, allegedly put, with the alliance with the United States, it has centered in hitting the fields that have planted the coke plants and the rural workers of Colombia. The rural workers of Colombia have centuries of military experience, and they are responding to violence with violence, and that's why we've had a 70-year war. That is not a drug trafficking war, but it started with the two traditional parties of Colombia fighting each other. It's a history that I'm not going to repeat at this moment. 70 years ago, we've had a tradition, and we could go further back. Every time the state is hitting the rural workers at any region, the rural workers would go to the mountains, arm themselves, and start a war against the state. Liberals and conservatives, insurgents in states during the Cold War, and I could also say armed groups working for drug traffickers and state for not so many years now. We do not want to repeat that history because we know that it's not good for Colombians and that it maintains us in violence. That is why we changed the strategy. For the traditional political class of Colombia, what I say is the oligarchy, a very small group in this city that has governed Colombia for centuries. They haven't been interested in the rural workers of Colombia. That's why they never did an agrarian reform in Colombia. That's why the rural workers in Colombia are living in very poor conditions and in very poor lands. Some of those lands, because of the violence that was unleashed, ended up being the forest, and there is where the cultivation of the coke plant started. But hitting the rural workers, we've been doing that for the past 30 years. Not me as a politician. I have opposed to those politicians, and the result has always been more violence. The change of strategy is not hitting the rural workers, but trying to win over the rural workers politically and socially. We want them to be an ally of the state. This is not my strategy. Hannah Arendt, in her book, she said this in New York and put the example before the United States and France. If the rural workers do not have our national flags, they will not be able to build a national state. So if we're not hitting that rural workers, how do we hit the drug traffickers? That's different, because drug traffickers have changed in Colombia from the mafia capo in chief that we saw in TV, like Pablo Escobar in Medellin, or others in Cali, or the mafia chiefs from Cali. Those mafia chiefs have been developing until we have the mafia chiefs that we see today, that some are Colombian but do not live in Colombia. Maybe many of them belong to European mafias articulated with the Colombian, Albanese, French, etc. And also they are allies of other mafias that have been conformed in Latin America, in Uruguay, Paraguay, Mexican, and from the United States, that the press does not cover them much. The cocaine market is now dominated by global multinational that are not in those boats that you will see hit by missiles in TB, or in those rural areas that you see in Colombia or other places, and not even in the cities. They are living in the great cities of the world, and they move their capitals, because they are multinationals, through the financial circuits of the great capital of the world. How do we hit those drug traffickers? We proposed a strategy that I'm going to describe to seize cocaine outside the cultivation camps, in the roads, in the storage places, in the ports where they majorly get to. The cocaine, for the most part, is leaving in great big vessels and not in those boats that you're seeing. Great containers that are leaving for Europe and the United States that come through the Caribbean, through mainly in the Pacific. If you have a chart, if you see a chart of the homicides in Colombia through regions, you'll find that the most violent regions in Colombia are the ports, including some airports. That means that the drug trafficking route of cocaine has made of ports some of its strategic points, because that is the place from where they go. To control those ports has been a struggle for drug trafficking. They have managed part of it because they've been infiltrating the political power of Colombia, and we have sought to take that control away from them. Just to give an example, you can read the case of Diego Marin in Portugal, and my intention of trying to capture him and bring him to Colombia as one of the controllers of one of the ports in Buenaventura, one who was making laundering money of drug trafficking. So I draw a conclusion. The boat, I need to stop it, but I cannot say that in that boat we have the drug trafficker. We have developed a great activity during the past years with the Navy, Colombian Navy, of cocaine seizing in the high seas in rapid vessels, as you've seen in those videos. That seizing in ports, in roads, and the sea, the seizing of boats and vessels who do not have the cocaine inside but below, in the great containers or in the ports of arrival, or also in the middle ports, because of an intelligence operations in an articulated way. That has been another of my efforts with every police force in the world that are pertinent, and their bodies. We have coordinated with Italy, Germany, France, Spain. We have coordinated efforts with the Arab polices as well, and the United States, with every country, every South American and Caribbean country as well. That coordination has been made us be able to seize tons of cocaine. Maybe the highest seizing was of 7 tons among ports where the cocaine is leaving, passing, and arriving, without a single murder, without a single dead person. Through intelligence and the infiltration of those armed groups, that's why we know when that cocaine is leaving. We are not achieving 100% because we have cocaine reaching the United States and all the markets in the world. So what do we do where we have the cultivation of the plant? The parallel strategy of intensifying the persecution of drug traffickers, its cocaine and assets, is giving a hand to the rural workers so that rural workers will take that plant from its roots. Taking it away from the roots is so important, and replace it with the help of the state with licit products, legal products that will be prosperous for the rural family. We've seen some activities, for example, this is a forced substitution. We do not have rural workers here. We have mines. We have over 400 injured soldiers and men in these cases. But when we do have rural workers, when the rural workers voluntarily, with an agreement with us, they accept this commercial agreement in order to replace their products, then we have no death. That is the reality we are facing. We have no deaths. So persecuting the assets of drug traffickers have been very efficient in Colombia. We haven't been able to do so outside of Colombia, and that is where the greatest wealth of drug traffickers lies. So the world is failing, and we are saying this. I've said this to Trump. In an efficient treaty, we have some, but not efficient, that will be able, in any place in the world, be able to seize the money and the capitals of those drug traffickers. We've only been able to do so efficiently in Colombia. The lands that I've been able to take, not me, but justice and justice procedures that goes to a government entity that I ran, that is called SAE right now. All the land, hundreds of thousands of hectares fertile lands have been sent to the National Agency of Lands so that it will give it back to the rural workers, and this is a way of controlling the possibility that cocaine cultivation continues. The map of 2023, please. Okay. This map is of the United States. It's a satellite map. We have a distinction of colors, basically. High definition, of course. The color of the leaf of the coke plant will determine its age, so we know what happened to these plantations. This report was the one that unleashed the crisis, or the one with which the desertification of Colombia was fundamented. And this was unleashing the best moment of Colombia in its fight against drug trafficking, the desertification. And we received it as an insult. I have been talking with Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York, regarding this issue. He brought the information, and we commented the grave error. I put error in quotation marks, but I'm going to comment this just quickly. All this area in colors, red, yellow, and green, this is coke cultivation. 250,000 hectares of coke, according to the report. In this case, this is just a photograph of the year. I would like to show you the development over the years. This is our government, and the red, as you see here, it's permanent cultivation. The year until the year 2023. The red is the most intense in terms of production and activity of the cultivation of the coke plant and its transformation. As you can see, you have a specific geographical location. One, it has to be a zone where you have a forest. It's a fundamental condition because the plant, it's Amazonian. It was found by the Incas in Peru. It was never used as you use it in the United States. That location in those rainforests, all of this place next to the Pacific, the Amazonian forest, in Catatumbo, next to Venezuela, and also in the south of Cordoba, you have these zones, basically. So you have this place next to the Pacific and the south of that Colombian Pacific. You can do an analysis here of how and why the violence has gone to Ecuador, but I'm not going to analyze there. So Putumayo is on the other side of the Andean mountain range. That is already an Amazonian forest. Do you hear me here? Here I'm going to explain quickly. This is the Southern Pacific region. Here as well, a smaller area, And this other region that you see it as well, this is Putumayo, this is the Putumayo River. Here you have the Amazonian River. They are joined together. So to understand why do we have cocaine here, and here we have the northeast, and of course here you are joining the Caribbean, and this is the only area with cocaine potential in the frontier with Venezuela, and we call it Catatumbo, next to Maracaibo and then out of the sea. Basically, you can go walking to Maracaibo and then to the sea. What is the report of the United States? The green, that's a very significant power of the area, has been abandoned during the past years. So it's not producing cocaine. You have the plants, but they are aging. They are less and less productive. So they are less productive as time goes by. And this area that you see here in the forest between the Amazon and at the Llanura, all of this frontier, also with another smaller points, this area has been abandoned. What was the great mistake or an alleged mistake of the United States? They took a couple of samples from here. They got a high productivity from those samples. You can say that here maybe you have the highest productivity in the world, where we had a military operation that left not one person dead. 10 kilograms of cocaine per hectare. That is the highest productivity in these red areas. Well, they applied that high productivity to the green area of abandoned zones. They applied everything and multiplied everything, and they had a potential, not the real, but the potential productivity in Colombia, and that's why they decertified us. What should this study have done? They should have taken samples from here as well in order to understand the productivity of these green areas, calculating the hectares, and they would have had two numbers with which you could have: one, the productivity of those red areas, and a very different and smaller number in the ones that have abandoned the coke production. This apparently, the people who are taking decisions in the United States do not know this. The United Nations does know this, and that's why after we spoke with Guterres, after I was there in the UN General Assembly, they wrote a public report stating that they had made a mistake. That it's not the Colombian president saying this, but this has been backed by the verification of the United Nations on the mistakes of its own investigation of 2023. But between they published this and the moment they admitted this error, they decertified us. The United States, in a unilateral action and without really understanding the development of the production of cocaine. Now, in order for the explanation purposes, this is here because this is going to Europe, not to the United States. This is going to Europe through the Amazon, the Atlantic, Africa, and also the southern region that has become a very similar market to the United States. These are going to the United States. Part of this through the Pacific Ocean, maybe crossing Panama towards the United States. The consumption of cocaine in the United States has stopped, but fentanyl has increased. So we have a worsening conditions in the consumption because fentanyl is 30 times as dangerous as cocaine. It's killing 30 times more within the United States. The European consumption of cocaine is increasing rapidly. I would not go into these details. The Colombian strategy of Petro administration has worked. First of all, this that could continue if we have more economic support. This could be turned into a revitalized forest if we are next to the forest, and to boost that Amazonian forest. You know that this is strengthening the third pillar, the climatic pillar of the world. So at the same time that we are carrying a war against drug trafficking, it's also a struggle for humanity in terms of the capacity of absorption of carbon dioxide. These areas are around 80,000 hectares. 80,000 hectares have been abandoned. Of 250,000 hectares, 80,000 have been abandoned. They haven't been producing for the past 3 years. For the ones that are in red and yellow in the year 2023, we have already managed in 2024 and present year 22,000 hectares of product substitution with the voluntary help of the rural workers. Now, if 250,000, I take out 80,000 and the extra, I still have 140,000 hectares. But we compare this to these historical figures that start in 2010. Again, this is from the United States. We had a very low level of hectares, and when do you have a great increase in this? You have an increase in the number of hectares that goes up to 171,000 in 2017. A key aspect of 2017, we have the peace process with FARC and the government of Santos. That's why we have a negative growth here. Negative with a peace process, not with violence. And then when that peace process is destroyed, the government of Duque, because of political reasons, because he is the heir of Uribe. So this that was falling starts shooting up again in the year 2020. It's not my government. This is the moment in which it increases rapidly in the year 2021 and until the year 2022 that goes up to 230,000 hectares. That's how I received this, and this is because the U.S. press through the Duque ministers are saying that I am the responsible for that hectares going up. If we look at percentages, because we have been able to just measure 2 years of my government, look at these percentages. Here we were going down, we were going a little bit up. In a year we have 43%. 43% annually here. Then we have 39 in the next year, 52% annually in the 2026, 17%, 16%, and then it stops with the peace process to negative numbers. This period of degrowing with this peace process hasn't been able to counter this periods of growing, and that's why when that peace process collapses and many of the people go back to arms, then we go to this increase again. An increase of 43% that takes the number to that level in which I received it in my government. What happened in the last year of Duque and the start of ours, and what happened in our administration? 13%, 10%, 3%, and that is the last number that we have. That means that what President Trump is saying to me is easy. These are UN numbers. These are the rates of growth. This is the numbers that shot up during the Duque administration, and this is how it's developing. And I would say that probably 2025 will be a negative number as well. These are the numbers of the United Nations, not mine. What I can say to Mr. Trump is that he has insulted Colombia, because this activity, that the growth rate is going down close to zero, and within the cultivation of the coke plant, the abandoning of those zones, close to 80,000 hectares for over 2 years, and substitution, growing substitution, voluntary substitution of 22,000 hectares. We've seen that our strategy of seizing cocaine, not hitting the countrymen, to seizing the assets of the drug traffickers, trying to extradite the drug traffickers, we've been successful for those. That strategy has been successful. We have had deaths, yes, and the deaths, this could be, it's not as easy to show in a chart, but the most successful year, of forced eradication was the year 2020. Had 130,000 hectares. The money of the United States spent on trucks and a lot of other paid personnel brought from other parts to this area. But when you look at the number, in that year, you have a small degrowing here. So where did the other number of lands go if afterwards you have a great growing? What happened to all of that money that was used to eradicate? Well, the government of that moment, that is where you see the failure of that policy of forced eradication. Well, first of all, they stole the money. We have no investigations, but they stole the money. Money from the United States. Because That policy of forced eradication, not the voluntary, but the eradication that was pushed by the United States. And because the rural workers weren't voluntarily in that process, but they were pushed with violence to that process, then they were cultivating right beside it, or they had the venom of the chemicals, and they weren't taking that plant from the roots. But that leaf would continue to grow with all the financial activity that was lost. That's why the forced eradication was a failure at this moment. And then we have these numbers shooting up. And now we have a new strategy showing other results, very consistent results in terms of statistics. Thank you, Mr. President, for presenting this strategy in this successful war on drugs. We are going to start the questions for the media that is joining us. 5 questions from 5 media outlets.
Iniciamos con Camila Osorio del país de España. Muchas gracias. ¿Cómo está? Bueno, el presidente Trump ya ha anunciado
President Trump has announced twice that he plans to cut all aid to Colombia, including the military one, to the public force as well. Are you worried about this, and what's the plan if Colombia loses this aid? He's taking out the support when we're having the best results in history. I need to underscore this. He's taking out support when we're being successful. That decision comes from a lobby that close to President Trump. My opinion is that President Trump does not know this. No one has explained this to President Trump. We have no ambassador. The experts in the United States are not explaining this. But an ideological lobby, very much infiltrated by our political opposition, that's the extreme Colombian right wing, and that's a topic for another analysis, and has governed during the past. All of these years are this, but during the years of the appearance of drug trafficking in Colombia, they have governed with the drug trafficking. That's why the results have been so bad, and that is why we are having the best historical results in Colombia, because we are not governing with drug trafficking. And that alliance, I denounced that alliance with the risks of my life at the moment, and that is why so many senators of Colombia went to jail. To say that 35 senators were allied of drug trafficking. We have 90,000 deaths at the moment from that alliance between the power and the drug trafficking. I was elected to change that, and that is why we are free from the problem of that alliance with drug trafficking, and that is why we are getting the best results. Now, at that moment, they are taking that aid away from us. Because in the past, the U.S. helped what if that was a failure? We ended up with 230,000 hectares with a consumption of cocaine that has not increased in the United States, but has shot up in Europe, and with also a great increase in the consumption of fentanyl that is happening inside the United States and other countries. What happens if they take the aid away from us? My opinion, nothing. We'll have specific problems. I have never seen in the budget of Colombia that we approve in Colombia a single dollar of U.S. aid. That doesn't go through the state. This is not aid to the government. No one is aiding us. So where are the subsidies? I can't find them. They are not in the budget. That aid is going to the NGOs managed by USAID, outside the government, usually of US origin. So it's like a self-help to its own entities. And they are buying its own chemicals and its own machinery. So we should ask if Colombian society and if what we have is violence on rural workers through the violent and forced eradication and also the arrests of rural men and women, also the setting of fire of the places and lands of the rural workers, we have great damage because they are condemning us to violence. In the war on drugs of Nixon, we've had 1 million Latin American deaths, and within that million, 300,000 Colombians that were assassinated for different reasons because of the leads and the needs of that oligarchy and the powers of the world. So in military aid, we have some problems because we've learned in military aid, we've learned that they've given weapons that were needed. We have storages of weapons that are aging because they are not needed. They've been purchased for political reasons. And the military forces that I command, we've replaced the aid with our national budget. So Colombia is buying its own weapons. For example, we have over 150 weapons guarding this palace, and these were property of the United States. So presidents were guarded by the U.S. So when we had problems, well, this palace was not guarded. So that was a problem. These helicopters are an aid, they are help. These and others. The Black Hawk helicopters, they are good not to transport of troops, but to combat itself. They come from the era of Vietnam. They are very efficient in the combat area of Colombia, the mountainous range. But if they are taking out and leaving with those military assets, they are taking those helicopters. That would be a problem. There are other helicopters. For example, there's a Russian helicopter that is good for transporting troops. 30, 40 soldiers can be carried by them. When the war between Russia and Ukraine started, the U.S. gave the order, which I thought shouldn't have been followed, to leave the helicopters that were not being maintained. By doing that, the army lost its capacity of great penetration in different areas. Imagine that you have a town and an upper mountain range in Catatumbo, well, you have these helicopters, but these helicopters cannot carry these soldiers. So you only have the possibility of doing an air operative, but we cannot penetrate the territory and we have great difficulty and we have lost the capacity to move our troops. And it's not just this topic, but we have lost this capacity of the army, and this is because we are depending on aid. Because in my opinion, that help can come, cannot come. There are interests with this aid, and that is not good in a country. And also in this budget now, in this current budget and the one that we have coming, we have allocated a number of resources in order to substitute this aid, this gifts that are not gifts, and in order to have the necessary arms that Colombia still has.
Muchas gracias a Camila. Seguimos con la periodista Genevieve Glatsky de The New York Times.
I could ask, were the weapons of NATO, China? Well, I have a pretty difficult line. I prefer Latin America. And because of the Amazonian rainforest, we already have a first instance of coordination, police coordination in Manaus for all Amazonian countries with no exclusion. And we could extend that experience to the entire region of Latin America. I believe in that idea. Besides what is publicly known, what else can we know about those Colombians that were affected by the bombings? And what can you do in order to protect the lives of Colombians when the Secretary of Wars announced that we'll be having daily bombings? Well, we have 32. Well, it's moving up every day. Undoubtedly, supposing that all of these were part of these transportation of cocaine, because we need to do a distinction here. The same that a rural worker cultivating a plant is not a drug trafficking, even though in very ideological news outlets could maybe mistake that rural worker with the drug trafficker. That is a great mistake. We are just very close. We've had some successes in the UN with our ambassadors to approve unanimously with the Commission of Human Rights of UN that is linking the war on drug trafficking with human rights. So in relations with the resolution of the Commission of Human Rights of the United States, what is being done is completely absurd and it goes against human rights of citizenships. But now, who? We only have the case of Santa Marta. The case of Santa Marta is a fisherman, of a fisherman family, traditional fisherman family, but could have been linked very casually, and because of the lack of economic resources, and this is a key aspect, lack of economic resources. Now, a boat like that could never reach the United States, and even less so in the Pacific. But we have these boats with an external motor engine, they will not reach anything but maybe another island, and from that boat take it to another middle boat, so that will continue with other routes. So calling them drug traffickers, well, no, at least in the best case, they are workers of that drug trafficking route. Just like the rural workers end up being linked to this trafficking, the lacking of resources are so grave that many people that work with boats and fisheries, they end up lending their resources to drug trafficking. The case of San Andrews, a very beautiful island next to Nicaragua, but Colombian, you know that if you go there and you talk to the mothers there, you have hundreds of young people that are being imprisoned in the United States because they know how to sail, and hundreds of young people who have been murdered by the mafia itself because they know the routes. They are afraid that they will denounce them, so they are killing the young people. So you have three circumstances that are affecting any young people in any Caribbean island. He can go to jail, he can be killed by a missile, he can be killed by the mafia that is buying him. So the solution to those young people is not a missile, it's a university in those islands. It's to allow the commerce of goods and foods between those islands. It's to allow a powerful fiber optic between those islands so that you have a powerful work for the youth, relatively well paid, without being a worker submitted to those drug links. Because in this activity, that Colombian has more activities than other areas in the region.
Presidente, muchas gracias. Voy a hacer, con su permiso, la pregunta en inglés para el canal y la repito en español. President Petro, you said Trump words are slander and that you will sue him in the United States, but what do you think Trump is hoping to achieve with these personal attacks against you? Presidente Petro, usted ha dicho que las palabras de Trump son...
President Petro, you've said that the words of Trump are infamous and that they look like the United States, but what is Trump seeking with his personal attacks? Well, we have a problem that I've just discovered it, and it's the journalistic translation of what Trump is saying. We have a Spanish-speaking people in press, and the great majority of the population speaks in Spanish, and they are doing the job of translating what Trump is doing, sometimes with some intention. So you have a word maybe that sounds very harsh, very harsh words against the president, and the original in English is not so harsh, as many examples will show. It's my mistake for having learned French and not English, but for the people who know, there's a subtle difference there, that if one goes quickly there, maybe we could end up in war just because the translation was wrongly done. Also, the press here is taking as spokesperson of the government of the United States the extreme right wing of the United States that is speaking Spanish. And we know that there are different tendencies there, so that extreme right wing that I called Miamiense from Miami, the extreme Colombian right wing that is living in Miami, that is the one that is surrounding Trump. And they are speaking to the Colombian press. And the extreme right wing of Colombia that lives in Miami is part of the drug trafficking. And they are doing a lobby that has an objective. So making the most of that closeness to Trump is trying to damage that strategy against drug trafficking in order to benefit themselves, who are the drug traffickers. And that is also ideological. Because for us, we democratically got here to win the elections. They are trying for us not to win the election again, so this will go backwards. Well, I respect the opinion of Trump, but I will not agree with him on this. And then another consequence is that in the midst of elections that are practically about to begin in Colombia, we have the ambitions of Venezuela. And if we join those ambitions that have to do with the elections in Colombia and the oil in Venezuela, then we have the hitting of a region in the hands of great international ambitions of drug trafficking, like Libya in the past or Syria of Iraq. And then the times of reconstruction would take us decades just because we are not producing a dialogue that is what we need.
Seguimos con Reuters y el periodista Luis Jaime Acosta.
Muy buenas tardes, señor presidente Gustavo Petro. Si eventualmente Estados Unidos a través de Trump impone aranceles como lo amenazó el fin de semana, ¿qué haría? ¿Qué piensa hacer su gobierno para protegerse?
What could you do if eventually the administration of Donald Trump could impose tariffs on markets such as coffee, for example? What would be the following steps? Will you insist with dialogue or maybe social networks and heated words? 26% of Colombian exports go to the United States. That would be the critical numbers. But 26% of those, 60% is oil and carbon, what I call fossils. So these are fossil exportations. And it should go down as in the rest of the world by the current government of the United States have reactivated its fossil industry. So we are talking about a 40% of the 26%, because on those they are not going to impose tariffs. Of the total amount of those exports. Of course, it's a problem if they put tariffs on the 10% of those Colombian exports. You have not all the coffee, not all the bananas, but I think that we can have great efforts in trying to mitigate those damages if that happen to occur. They are not going to impose tariffs on the fossil exports because they are not going to put high prices on what they are using. But we are trying to open to other parts of the world. We've been quite unilateral in our export matters. And we are looking into Europe and Latin America. because obviously it's not in the logics of the background, just as Latin America as it was before, and also, of course, China. So we have a great arc still not built between Europe, Latin America, and China. Colombia has made great advancements and efforts, and also through the South Asian nations. So that idea of a Colombia that is open to the world, a world that knows that Colombia will make that opportunity, and that Colombians know and move around the world. I know that by far that is much more important. Mr. President, good afternoon. With the position of Trump, we have also the position of human rights organizations that have made a proposal of evaluating the presence of U.S. military and the possibility of taking them out. What is your idea on that perspective? What I've tried to show here is how the Colombian strategy, without it being perfect, is more efficient than what has been happening. And we can see it in numbers, in quantities, in the number of deaths. This is more efficient. The bodies that are from the United States collaborating with us in this sort of struggle, and I'm talking about intelligence bodies most of all, that have their ups and downs, because CIA also brought Pegasus during the Duque government, and that is an activity that it goes against constitutional law. So using the police, we have not a single jailed person for that activity. We need to restructure our collaboration. Maybe that crisis will allow us to discuss that. I've had, and I've been told, why do we have visas and they're sending us the people forced in airplanes, and why don't we do the same thing? We have thousands of U.S. citizens who do not have legal permanence here, including also Israeli citizens in the same condition, and dubious activities, and also uniformed personnel, as you were asking. I gave nationality to an Israeli because he got married to a Colombian before being imprisoned by Hamas. I had an extreme right-wing person saying that I was linked to Hamas and did not even know about this idea, because I wanted to protect him from any danger by being imprisoned, but because I knew or thought that with being the Colombian, they would be very considerate of that fact. They ended up treating every prisoner. But what this shows is that I'm not interested in persecuting any nationality or people. What I want is that Colombian nationality or Latin American nationality or Caribbean is not persecuted. I do not want to pay in the same way, because what I dream of, what I aspire to in the long term, in the horizon, that I wish would not be so far away, is a global democracy with free people around the world. So presidents are not the ones that are taking away freedoms, are the ones who are denouncing that these freedoms are taken away.
el sistema de de la señal oficial de noticias de Rusia, RT, el señor periodista Andrés Fernández.
Presidente, buenas tardes. Usted ha dicho que se va a defender en los
President, you've said that you would
las calumnias de Trump.
defend yourself in the United States in the face of the infamous declarations of threats, also on the part of senators. And how do you see the exercises that the U.S. is carrying out in Panama? I've been talking to the Panamanian president. I've seen a recent case in Bocas del Toro, the frontier between Panama and Costa Rica. Many people died there at the moment when Panama was Colombia, fighting with liberals, revolutionaries on the Caribbean from Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, against the conservative positions. This was an armed force, an armed struggle at the moment in the 19th century, and we lost a decisive battle at this moment, and we lost Panama. That was liberal, and it ended up in conservative dominance. And the Panamanian population ended with the United States becoming independent, relatively independent, with the canal. When I was there, well, I saw something that any Colombian would see. Well, this could be, maybe this could be a little bit ours as well, but that maybe could be a diplomatic problem. And I was surprised by those forces, foreign forces, because that wouldn't happen in Colombia. And they have much more interests with the United States than us. They are lending their services to the United States, but I cannot critique those decisions of the sovereign state of Panama. But I thought of this, and I called, because of the U.S. exercises, because we're going to militarily occupy 5 municipalities of the Colombian territories, not because we have a Panamanian force or U.S. force inland. President Mulino assured that that was not the case, and I believe in his word. But we have the mediation of Qatar at this moment. It has been very efficient. Maybe Spain. I will ask for it. We've been asked in order to be able to have an outing there in the Dariel, the border with Panama, with the armed group at the moment there. That's the Gulf Clan. That is an experience that we haven't spoken about this. That is why I've received some critiques, and also they've said that I'm linked to drug trafficking, but
de bienes, tierras, cocaína en cantidades ya casi 1,000 toneladas este año, 1,000 toneladas este año. El potencial que habían dicho que teníamos era 2,600, con la corrección puede quedar por 2,000 o debajo de 2,000, con lo cual todavía el excedente que no logramos coger, pues mantiene el mercado que existe, pero los narcotraficantes saben que ya en Colombia tienen un grave problema. Por eso no hablamos mucho de esto. Es una parte negativa de la estrategia. La violencia aumenta en Ecuador, se exporta más cocaína ahora en Ecuador que en Colombia, cocaína que es de Colombia. Las redes mafiosas se están expandiendo por América Central, por el Caribe y por América del Sur, en la medida en que cada vez se encuentran más dificultad en Colombia. Este es un tema para nosotros positivo, pero de cuidado y de coordinación para el resto del continente. Bueno, eso lo vamos a hacer.
We were listening to Colombian President Gustavo Petro. At this moment, we go live to Venezuela, where Defense Minister Vladimir López is offering statements. Let's listen to him as well.
Y mujeres que están aquí presentes órganos